All right, I've got the Learning Target 3 and 4 notes pulled up here, but I'm going to break the video up into two. So this video is just for the Learning Target 3 notes. We'll come back and finish the 4 in a second video. Learning Target 3 is finding the least common multiple of polynomials, which will include monomials, binomials, trinomials, etc., which will eventually be called the least common denominator when we start to add and subtract the fractions in Learning Target 4. So, some previous knowledge. What's the common denominator between 1/5 and 1/6? Some of you can just see those two numbers and know that it's 30. Some of you can look at the next problem and say, all right, the common denominator between a 6 and a 15 is also 30. And then when you're looking at number 3, what's the common denominator between a 4, a 6, and an 8? Some of you look at that and say 24. So that's great. If you can do that in your head, if you can see those things, then do those. But some of the numbers get pretty big and you might need another method. So I want to offer up another way to find it. Your teacher probably taught you when you found this 24 to list out the multiples of 4, which are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, blah, blah, blah. List out the multiples of 6, 6, 12, blah, 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 and the multiples of 8, 8, 16, 24, and find the first one that they have in common. All right, so that'll work, but when the numbers get big, you might want a different method. So that method is this. If you take the 5 and 6 and you list out the factors that they have in common, well, 5 and 6 don't have any factors that they have in common. So when we use the factors of 5 and the factors of 6 to write a common denominator, we're going to use all three factors, 2 times 3 times 5, which will give us 30. All right, well, let's see what happens in number 2, though. The 6 and the 15, they have a factor of 3 in common. So when I write 6, I'm going to write it as 2 times 3, and when I write 15, I'm going to write it as 3 times 5, knowing that they share the 3. So I circle those to indicate they're sharing that 3. They're not sharing the 2, not sharing the 5. So when we write the common denominator, we could do it this way. Use that shared 3 once, times the leftover 2, times the leftover 5, and you get the 30 that way. So what would that look like for our 4, 6, and 8? Well, all three, the 4, 6, and 8, they all share 2. So I started by writing each of them as 2 times whatever else. Then I thought about the 4 and the 6 and thought, well, they're not going to share anything else. But the 4 and the 8, they're going to share another 2. So I wrote 8 as 2 times 2 times 2. All right, so that indicates that they share a 2 and that the 4 and 8 share another factor of 2, but then there's that leftover 3 and leftover 2. If you take the first shared 2, that one that they all three share, the second shared 2 that the 4 and the 8 share, and multiply that times the leftover 2 and the leftover 3, you got 2 times 2 times 2 times 3, which gives you 24. It's just another way to find the common denominator, 24. All right, so that's how I'm going to actually do the problems for Learning Target 3 is by writing out the prime factorization, or at least writing out what they will have in common, and then only use what they have in common once. So when I'm thinking about 2a and 5b, I'm thinking, does a 2 and a 5 have anything in common, factors in common? No. So I'm going to write 2, and I'm going to write 5. Does an a and a b, do they have anything in common? No. So I'm going to write 2 times a, and I'm going to write 2 times b, knowing that I've just got to use all of these factors. A lot like we had to use the 5, the 2, and the 3 to make the 30. But when we put these all together, the least common multiple, which will become least common denominator, is 2 times 5 times a times b. Put it all together, and that's 10ab. Makes a little more sense in number 2. I'm going to change this problem to y cubed. So for starters, that's a y cubed now. When I'm thinking about the 5 and the 6, are they going to share any factors? Let's see. No, 5 doesn't share anything with the number 6 factor, so I'm going to write 5 over here, and I'm going to write 6 over here. Now I'm thinking about the x's. This one has 2 x's. This one has 2 x's. So they're going to share 2 x's. So when I write this, I'm going to write 5x squared, 6x squared, and I'm going to circle the x squared to indicate that they're sharing those factors. And then finally, the y and the y cubed how many of the y's are they going to share? Well, this one has 1, this one has 3, so they're going to share 1. So I'll write that as a y and that as a y and circle it. But then there's still 2 more leftover y's over here. So now let's put that all together. The least common multiple between a 5 and a 6 is 5 times 6, 30. Now the x's, they shared 2 x's, so we'll only use those 2 x's once. And then the y's, they share a y, and then there's these leftover 2 y's. So you got 1 shared y and 2 more y's. You have 3 y's total. All right, now when I taught this in class, I made them kind of do a few more examples before they came up with the shortcut, but this will always work. If you're going to share 2 x's and share 2 x's, then you're going to have 2 x's. If you're going to share 1 y and share 1 y, but then you're still going to use those 2 leftover y's, you're always going to have 3 y's. You're going to have the largest exponent. So for monomials, like number 1 and number 2, you can use this shortcut. Whatever the highest exponent of x is, that's going to be your least common multiple for the x. Same for the y, and so forth. Now, in number 3, 4, and 5, we shift from monomials to binomials and trinomials. So, first I'll exaggerate the comma. The multiplication sign is between this parenthesis and that one, and between that parenthesis and that one, which means the factors are x minus 2, x plus 1, x plus 1, and x minus 3. So what factor do these share? They share an x plus 1. They don't share the x minus 2 and don't share the x minus 3. So when you're writing the least common multiple, you use that shared x plus 1 once, but you still have to use the leftover x minus 2 and x minus 3. All right. At this point, it's probably not making a whole lot of sense of why are we doing this, what's this for, but you got to keep in mind that this skill is finding a common denominator. In the next page on the Learning Target 4, we're going to add and subtract fractions that don't have the same denominator, so that's going to require us to find the common denominator. So keep that in mind while we're learning Learning Target 3, that it has a purpose, and we'll see that better when we get to the next target. All right, so number 4, we have a trinomial and a binomial that can factor. So we need to factor those first, x plus 3, x plus 2, and x plus 3, x minus 3, using our factoring techniques. And then we notice that they share an x plus 3 factor. So our least common multiple is the shared x plus 3 and the leftover x plus 2 times the leftover x minus 3. And then finally, number 5. I like to, well, let me exaggerate the comma so you can see that there are 3 different polynomials that we're going to have to find the common denominator, common multiple for. I like to take the monomial 3, 6, and 9 and deal with it first. Some of you can just look at the numbers 3, 6, and 9 and think, what's the common denominator between a 3, 6, and a 9? Some of you just look at those numbers and say it's 18. For those that need that little strategy that we talked about earlier, think of it this way. 3 and 6, they share a 3. And 9 also has a 3. So when you write this, you might want to take the 6 and write it as 3 times 2, and the 9 is 3 times 3, and know that they all share a 3. But there's still a leftover 2, leftover 3. So shared 3 times 2 times 3 gives you the 18. Then we look at the binomial parts, and this x plus 5 is shared with that x plus 5, and this x plus 1 is shared with that x plus 1. Therefore, the least common multiple will have one of these shared x plus 5s, but it will also have one of the shared x plus 1s. So that's Learning Target 3.